We got Delian in the Temple of Technology. Welcome to the show, Delian. How you doing?
What's going on?
What's up, boys? Thanks for having me on again. Excited to catch up.
Appreciate it. We're calling this Delta V with Delian. Our little
Ooh.
space update. We're still workshopping the name, but we got to come on. We got to come up with a catchy, pithy phrase for all the regular guests. But very excited to have you here. Can you give us an update? Let's start with the rescued astronauts. You got community noted. The ex-Army really came out for you. How'd you process the landing? Break it down for us.
You know, I already have enough of an ego that I don't need to overly sort of praise myself even more. But all I'm gonna say is they go up. I forget the exact timing, but beginning of June last year.
Yep.
I sent out this tweet that's like end of June where I was just like losing my mind because I was like, how is nobody talking about this? Like these guys are like totally stuck up there. It's clear that Boeing and NASA clearly are panicking and realize that like they can't take these guys down on Starliner, and nobody's even begun a plan for how to bring these guys down. And so I tweet basically like, hey, why is nobody talking about the fact that there's like two American astronauts like stranded in orbit? And like, look, if it were like Apollo days or like space shuttle days and they were stuck up there for an extended period of time, people would 100% be using like the word stranded. And so I was just like so confused as to why like this just was getting no attention. And then I literally just felt like I was being fucking lied to. And I get community noted and it's like, oh, like they're totally fine. They're doing some like final checkouts on Starliner. I'm like, has anybody like read the comms that NASA and Boeing are putting out? Like this thing's clearly in like a very bad state. Definitely in no way that they actually like decide to bring astronauts, sort of down on it. And the word stranded had not yet been used a single time in any like NASA comms, in anybody's like comms about the entire mission. Within 24 hours of my tweet going viral, NASA put out a press release explicitly saying the astronauts are not stranded. And like then the word
No way.
stranded became like totally in the lexicon around the mission.
Yep.
I'd like to think that it had something to do with that, sort of viral tweet. Maybe there were other people that,
Let's
sort of
go.
influenced it. And then got even like literally, the White House's communications this past week said, we brought back the stranded astronauts. So I'm going to claim credit on stranded being the case. The entire thing to me was, sort of crazy, not to give, there's a lot of history that we could give here, but like, when Commercial Crew was originally getting started, the original plan by NASA was to only, do it as a sole source award just to Boeing. SpaceX was seen as a bunch of, cowboys, hoo-haws that had no chance of actually being able to be trusted with, sort of human astronauts on board. They actually had to delay the announcement because in like the final hours, they basically decided to do it as a split award where they gave Boeing, by the way, it's crazy. Like they literally just gave Boeing twice the price per seat. So it's just like Boeing, it's like, hey, the price is like $10 for SpaceX, and for Boeing, it's $20. And like, we're just going to pay them more. Why? Because, it's because Boeing has a 200-person lobbying team. And so there was like a very near world where like we only had Boeing as the only option. It was only like in the final hours of that program that like SpaceX was, sort of given an alternative. And like, thank God, otherwise like we would have been begging the Russians to bring our astronauts back. And, it's a little tricky to do when you're also like, providing, weapons to their, enemies. So, that would have been
Was
like
this
pretty geopolitically
was this
toxic.
a lot of people, would say this was political? Was it do you think these astronauts are coming back like deeply radicalized? Like are they you're up in space a long time, you got a lot of time to think. I don't know how the internet connection is up there, if there even is one. They don't have necessarily the bandwidth to doom scroll. Are they coming back sort of like deeply? Are they going to be like kept off camera? Like you guys got to kind of stay off the mics for a while you cool off, or what do you think their reaction is to the whole thing?
Well, now that it's the Trump administration, I don't think that Trump will, sort of limit them from the mics. But I think what's incredibly clear is SpaceX offered to bring the astronauts back sooner. And because it was in the midst of the election cycle and because Musk was campaigning for Trump, the Biden administration turned down that offer. There's a whole lot of fucking, jackos and wahoos that will try and convince you otherwise. Hey, this is the pre-existing ISS schedule. This is when Dragon was scheduled to go up, etc. So they had to stay up there for... No way. If somebody had gone to Elon and said, yes, like according to the standard NASA budgetary process, this was supposed to fly then, but like one of the astronauts has like, bone density issues and is having health problems up there. We want to bring her down like this week because it was planned to be like a 3-week long mission, not a 9-month long mission. They 100% could have done that. The Biden administration very much so tried to challenge those, sort of facts and deny that. Dems today even have tried to deny that. Crazy is like typically NASA astronauts, at least in the, like, past 20 years have not ever really made even the slightest inklings of political statements. Butch and Sunni like basically confirmed these facts. Like they basically made it clear, hey, we could have been brought back earlier, and we were like denied the opportunity to be brought back earlier. And if I were them, I'd be pretty pissed because like Sunni, I believe like did suffer bone density issues and was not supposed to be up there, sort of for for that long. And so I wouldn't be surprised if you've already seen them push the fold on what they've been willing to say behind the mic. I wouldn't be surprised if they like do that even more now that they're on the ground and you're in a Trump administration.
Do you think that NASA has a talent crisis? You could imagine that Boeing is finding it difficult to compete on, getting the best talent when there's SpaceX and Varda and all these other players that are sort of competing for the best and brightest in the world. I imagine NASA is very prestigious, but at the same time, you're going to work in this government organization and there's a bureaucracy. And, if you're 22 years old right now and your hero's Elon Musk, and Elon Musk is beefing on the timeline with NASA, like where are you going to go, right?
Yeah, I mean, I do think they have a real challenge. They also have a bit of an identity crisis where they are turning more and more to buyers of commercial off-the-shelf hardware versus like developers of it. And so what does that transition look like? But then if you only have people internally that are just buyers and don't have an engineering background, how do you know that they're buying the best stuff? At the same time, look, like, NASA also like flew a helicopter on fucking Mars.
Yeah.
That's insane. Like that's like a crazy capability. Nobody else would be capable of doing that. Yes, they worked with AeroVironment as like the contractor for that, but they had like such a heavy hand in that. They're now talking about like flying a helicopter on Mars. They did like the, sort of 6 minutes of what is it called? Like when the Curiosity rover came down, like the 6 minutes of, hell or whatever it is.
Yeah.
They're like, literally using like retro boosters to like sky crane down a rover. So like there's a lot that NASA does that is like requires crazy talent. But I think what they need to, sort of go through, and I think like, Trump administration is likely aligned with this, Jared Isaacman, the likely incoming administrator, is NASA needs to basically just focus on two core parts. One, the core of space capabilities, they just become buyers of, and they just buy things off the shelf. And then where they're developing technologies directly themselves, it should only be the really radical, super far out things, right? Like there's just not commercial space companies that are like talking about like, we're going to build like off the shelf Mars helicopters. Like
we talked about this. We talked about this last time. Like asteroid deflection is something that NASA should work on because it's not that commercial, right? It's like we maybe need to do it once every 50 years, hopefully not. And then at NASA, you can be the hero.
Yeah,
exactly.
Can we move on to the continuing resolution? Can you break that down for us?
Yeah. I mean, it kind of relates to some of the NASA stuff too, where, it's been interesting to see, this quarter feels like it's been the most active in, sort of defense tech, aerospace investing in a long time. Some of which feels rational, some of which feels sort of crazy over the top. And it's just interesting to have this like massive flow of capital, from, venture investors going into this field, while at the same time, the flow of capital from DC literally has been halted, right?
Yeah.
So, for the, sort of less informed, viewers, ultimately defense tech and aerospace companies that are selling to the government. Yes, there's commercial, sort of use cases for these technologies. Those aren't related to government budgets, but are ultimately, a lot of these reliant on government budgets. About 10 days ago, the House and Senate agreed upon a year-long continuing resolution. And so what that basically means is both the House and the Senate had previously passed budgetary bills that increased basically defense spending, had various NASA spending, et cetera. Couldn't come to an alignment on that, couldn't come to an alignment with the presidents. And so the ultimate, sort of call by all parties was we're actually just going to freeze to whatever fiscal year 24 levels, basically are. Now, in that CR, they did give the DoD, hey, we know that you guys are thinking about like, sort of reprogramming. And so as you're shifting budgets around, make sure that it reflects whatever like, House appropriators, and, Senate appropriators basically had in those budgets that they basically put out, sort of end of February. But in the grand scheme of things, this mostly means a freezing of new ads, any new programs. And as you can imagine, who's the biggest, sort of beneficiary of that? Well, incumbents have their programs continuing to be funded, right? And so the, Lockheed's, Raytheon's, et cetera, Northrop's, might not be experiencing as much growth as usual, but, they're generally, continuing to be funded. versus all of the net new entrants, while are experiencing massive inflows of venture capital dollars, have literally been told by the U.S. government, like, expect zero stars. And so it's just a little odd to me that that's not a thing that is being talked about by all these people that are talking about like the Gundo dynamism, this, that. It's like,
Well,
should
who
we also
talks the most on X? It's founders and investors, and neither have an incentive to really say like,
Yeah.
hey, by the way, none of us are making anything back anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. As like a paranoid founder, I like to talk about this stuff because,
Yeah.
you know, I want to make sure that like the thing that I'm working on, you know, survives for a very long time and is like sustainable. But like to be clear, what this means practically is like, you know, basically this year's budget, you know, was basically end September 31st is completely frozen. Now what's being, you know, begun to be worked on is like the fiscal year, you know, so 26 vehicle. That's gonna, you know, first have to come from like, you know, sort of the president, you know, putting forth, you know, sort of a plan that you'd expect to make it over to, you know, sort of the House and Senate in like roughly the May period. That means it's gonna make it onto the floor in like, you know, sort of June, July. Hopefully gets passed by like September, October. Realistically, though, we basically have not hit that September 31st deadline for the past, I don't even know what it is, like 10 plus years. And so that continuing resolution is probably going to extend for at least another 30, potentially 60 days. So, you know, potentially until the end of the year. That means that like new budget actually doesn't start until, you know, basically January of next year. And so all these companies that are raising all this capital for all these things that they would like to start, yes, there's going to be reprogramming. Yes, like the president is, you know, doing shipbuilding and CAA, et cetera. But like a lot of this stuff is very much so frozen. And, you know, what people don't realize is, let's say, you know, you have, you know, sort of CAA or CCA, sorry, and, you know, sort of shipbuilding. Those 5-year plans that the DoD put together, where they were like, look, in order to do the early R&D in 2024, we need 100 million. In 25, we need 200 million. In 26, we need 300 million. Well, because we're now frozen at 24 levels, that means it's only 124 and 125. So now when you're looking at 26, it's like, are you making up for the fact that 25, you know, sort of was, you know, low, and you're trying to scale all the way to 26? You're like in a real budgetary hole. So like new programs are also in a way worse state, because it's typically the new programs that are the ones that grow, that are growing. And so if it's flat, you're both trying to figure out, do you make up for last year, and how do you keep up with like what the program needs? Or are you like really pushing out milestones? But if you're pushing out milestones, now is it relevant to Taiwan if people are thinking about that needing to be ready in 2027, 2028? And so does that now make the DoD just want to keep shifting budget to incumbent programs that can deliver by 27, 28, even if they're not as capable, right? So there's just like a lot of things where it's just like, you know, I'm a, you know, yeah, obviously mega bull on like the team at Anduril, because like they have the like bench, the capability, the, you know, set of different product suites, different programs going, like they will navigate this. But like, I don't know if there's going to be like 5 Andurils. And
Yeah.
I think VCs are investing like there's going to be, you know, sort of 5 Andurils right now, but without even understanding like the basics of like the budgetary, you know, sort of process on the Hill. They're just, you know, sort of slinging checks, you know, based off of, you know, the, you know, zip code of where somebody's office is.
If you're a yeah, if you're an American dynamism defense tech investor, are you looking at, you know, are you seeing more pitches in Europe right now? If the Anduril of Anduril is Anduril here in the U.S., but then Europe is like remilitarizing, at least Western Europe. You know, are you seeing pitches come in? Would people just kind of divert dollars over there because there's potentially a lot more willingness to spend?
I think you're starting to see that happen. Obviously, both the Overton window has changed there. The like, you know, sort of budget, you know, sort of growth there is insane. And if you think that like U.S. incumbents are like stodgy, old school, et cetera, EU incumbents are like, you know, sort of that, you know, jacked up to the nines. And so I do think there's a real opportunity there. There aren't a ton of like super competent players. And so, you know, I wouldn't say that like the quality of what we get, you know, sort of inbound, at least at Founders Fund, is, you know, something, you know, super high in Europe. The thing that I will say though is at least the biggest check that I've ever, you know, sort of led is like a net new, you know, portfolio company investment. So not just like follow-ons. Obviously, we've deployed mega checks into Ramp, but that was after doing seed and Series A. But we're investing about $36 million into basically a European aerospace defense, you know, sort of type player. And that's our first check into the company. Now, part of it is that the company was already performing very well, irrespective of the EU tailwinds. And then now with reindustrialization, et cetera, we're like even more bullish, you know, sort of on the, you know, company. But we're also getting to do it at a price that is like highly differentiated relative to like the, you know, 94129, you know, sort of, sorry, shoot, that's the SF, you know, sort of zip code.
Oh yeah.
056, you know, sort of zip code.
With all this turmoil at the DoD and with the budget and the continuing resolution, is it more important than ever that these companies figure out commercial applications? We talked to a company, Albedo, they're a satellite company yesterday. It seemed like even if the government doesn't want to buy the ISR capabilities, there are hedge funds and oil and gas providers that want, you know, high resolution images from VLEO. And so is that something that I mean, you've thought about this at Varda with the pharma and DoD contracts. How do you think about that? And is that more important going forward?
Yeah, but I think it's like one of these things that's like very, sort of hard to pivot to depending on how you've set up your business, right?
Sure.
So, take a business let's say like Saronic. I'm not sure there's that many commercial use cases for, sort of small scale autonomous surface vessels, or take a company, like Apex that is, mostly selling, sort of commercial satellites. Now, some of them are to like, various defense groups, but they also have a bunch of commercial sales, right? So
Sure.
I think it's one of these things that it's really hard to like pivot from one approach to the other. Maybe somebody like Palantir has clearly shown it where they were super DoD focused for a long time and now have a massive commercial business. But that felt like it happened at like the very, very late stages of the company. I think your ability to like pivot from, either being dual use from the get-go or being defense from the get-go, you kind of have to choose one. And we've obviously chosen the like, sort of dual use from the get-go. Does that give us some cons when it comes to like defense programs? Yeah, because like we're not as willing to like change around our architecture to totally match defense needs. But the pros is also in a continuing resolution year, I also have a lot of commercial work that I can continue to go pursue. So there's pros and cons, I think, to sort of both approaches.
Well, the DoD
but I don't think you're going to see that much shifting. It's just too hard to shift.
Well, if the DoD isn't buying kamikaze drones, I'm happy to buy them personally for my next hunting trip. Give me the C4. Let's lift the ITAR control rules. Get me the suicide drone. I want to go hunting for some big
Wild
game.
boars.
Thank you, Delian, for coming on. Do you have a last question?
We got
Jay coming
yeah,
on.
we got another
One
guest
more
coming on,
question.
but quick question. Do you think that the deal, without commenting on Rippling and deal, do you think that was a wake-up call for the defense industry around, hey, if this is happening in HR tech, like we got to take everything way more seriously, right? Because obviously, people probably, anybody that would be competing with Varda knows who else is like bidding on the contract. It's like common knowledge. It's not the same type of information advantage. But if people are willing to like break the law to steal customer data, CRM data for HR tech, it to me should just be this massive wake up call around, if you're doing anything that's critical to national security, you need to take your own security at your company 10 times more seriously.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at the, sort of SpaceX, the Andurils, the Vardas, the Hadrians, et cetera, on down, the per capita number of like IT security people you basically need on staff because of just like ITAR compliance, et cetera, means these companies are thinking about it all the time. Now, at the same time, are there like Chinese spies and, foreign spies sniffing around all of these? Almost certainly. Are there other corporate spies sniffing around this all the time? Absolutely. But I do think you see this stuff a bit less in terms of, actually having these like, sort of totally negative effects. Partially because like, with Rippling and Deal, it's like, okay, let's pull like which software features, et cetera. When it comes to something like Varda, man, it's like, what would you even pull from our servers to figure out how to do what we do? It's like, you could get this CAD file, this thing, but it's like, you need the supply chain, you need to cut the metal, you got to integrate it, you got to know how to test it, et cetera. It's like, even if you gave me access to our full server base, and you gave me a team of like 30 engineers, and you tell me go replicate Varda, it would still be like a really hard problem. Like if you look at the, sort of Chinese rockets, they look a hell of a lot like the Falcon 9s. And they're still not landing, right? And so, I think it's clear that like the Chinese definitely ripped a lot of stuff from SpaceX at some point or another. It's really hard to, sort of prevent that from happening. Sort of can't blame, anybody for having that happen to their company. But also the Chinese still aren't landing rockets. Now, their solution has just been, let's build as many rockets as possible and screw it, rather than purposely landing them on barges, we're just going to ditch them over Chinese villages and like, dump propellant on like our, sort of poor villagers. But like, whatever, we're going to set up, the first Chinese lunar base before the Americans because like, we're just willing to murder citizens nonstop on the way to a goal. And, unfortunately for America, we don't, murder our citizens. We only murder our presidents.
Oh, JFK files. Good deep cut. I love it.
Well, at least we didn't land on the Dolphins yesterday.
Yeah, that's good. The Dolphins seemed like they were good. Let's end on a high note.
Look, maybe the Dolphins work for Mossad, though. That's all I'll say.
Maybe.
You never know.
As soon as you get off the Dolphin
tech,
asks
there's some crazy.
What happened on the ISS?
No, there's some crazy NASA lore around dolphins. Don't Google it.
Don't Google it.
But
okay. Well, thank you, Delian. We'll talk to you soon.